Dr. Hester is our senior scientist. She heads up our global product research and guiding for so many of our core Pharmanex products. So Dr. Hester, take it away.
Hey, well, it's such a pleasure to be here. And I am so excited to finally be talking to you today about anthocyanins and metabolic health. This is an area that we have been working on for many years. As Angela alluded to, we've actually been doing research for 7 years. So it really is exciting to finally be here and talk to you. So I just want to start on, what is metabolic health and why is this important? So many times people think metabolic health is just about that conversion of food to energy, but it's so much more. And our body's biochemistry is complex, and there's this metabolic network that really impacts a lot of these key indicators in our body, like the levels of our blood sugar, the levels of our insulin and our insulin sensitivity, our blood pressure, and even our cholesterol and our triglycerides. And metabolic health really is so important for overall health. And as you've already heard today, unfortunately, metabolic health is disrupted by our modern lifestyle. And the modern lifestyle can be a little different for every person, but sometimes it's not being active enough, watching too many of our shows, watching too much TikTok in the evening before bed, or staying up too late, not getting that 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night, or not being consistent on when you're sleeping, working too much, having too much stress from work or your social interactions. And one big problem that we all have is just poor diets. Are we eating too many foods that are high in sugar and have unhealthy fats? And unfortunately, our modern lifestyles, and people recognize that their modern lifestyles are taking a toll on our body. And a recent study that was published actually showed that only 1 in 8 people in the US is actually considered metabolically healthy. And when you look at indications like blood sugar, triglycerides, HDL cholesterol, blood pressure, waist circumference, you can see that people are not metabolically healthy. And a lot of times people think, well, I'm skinny, I'm a healthy weight, so I'm metabolically healthy. Well, this study showed that that's not true. So 2/3 of people that were normal weight had a healthy BMI. They did not have optimal metabolic health. And another factor is people say, well, I'm young, so I have good metabolic health. Well, this study again showed that that is not true. So 77% of people in this particular study that were 20 to 39 years of age were found not to have optimal metabolic health. And then that percent of people that don't have optimal metabolic health did increase with age. So 91% of those 40 to 59-year-old and 98% of those 60 years of age and older. So just showing that a lot of people do have disruptions in their metabolic health that may not even be aware of it. And so there's a lot of examples that we could look at for key indicators, key biomarkers of metabolic health. And one of these is glucose and how it impacts our insulin response. So if you have a diet high in carbs and you have higher blood glucose response because of poor metabolic health, that results in more insulin being produced. So insulin is produced to help bind to the insulin receptors on your cells to help glucose be taken up into the cells and utilized. So if you have too much insulin, that actually triggers fat storage in your body and decreases fatty acid oxidation, or the burning of fat. So extra calories that you're consuming that would typically be used in a healthy way for energy are now stored as fat. And this does lead to negative overall effects. And another factor of metabolic health is stress in your life, specifically cortisol. And that can also be negatively linked with insulin sensitivity. So another thing that we like to talk about metabolic health is, good metabolic health really has a protective effect. And good metabolic health basically leads to greater metabolic flexibility. And what we mean by that is that metabolic health is not only impacted by how physically active we are or what we eat, but it also impacts how our body responds to those lifestyle factors, those stressors that we get throughout the day. And an example of this would be if you eat a snack or a meal that has carbohydrates or sugar in it. So if you look at the abnormal, the red bar, the red line on the graph, you can see this individual does not have healthy metabolic health. So if they eat that carbohydrate food, their glucose is going to increase and it's going to stay elevated for a longer period of time. But if somebody has healthier metabolic flexibility, metabolic health, they can consume that same food with carbohydrates and have a much healthier peak in response to that glucose and return to baseline. And so metabolic flexibility really is about how your body handles all of those daily insults and stressors in a more healthy way. And so, as we've already mentioned on this call, metabolic health is about all those choices that you make every day. And we like to think of metabolic health as a spectrum. And these key indications of metabolic health, like blood sugar and your blood fat, your triglycerides, are impacted by those choices you make every day. And none of us are perfect, but we can choose to make lifestyle choices to help shift us towards that healthier metabolic health. And so it's things like taking that walk after lunch today and exercising on a regular basis, eating that diet high in fruits and vegetables, getting adequate sleep, maintaining a low level of stress or handling that stress in your life in a healthy way. And another way, we're going to talk about this in a lot more detail, are consuming foods and ingredients like anthocyanins can help with metabolic health. And it's all about these little choices you make. And so what are anthocyanins? So anthocyanins are these very vibrant, dark blue, purple, and sometimes even red pigments in fruits and vegetables and grains. And it's really giving these vibrant colors to those fruits and vegetables that we are eating in our diet. And these anthocyanins have been shown by research that we've done here at New Skin that we'll go into more detail in a few minutes, but also third-party literature that they really do impact metabolic health and other health parameters. And so, are you getting enough anthocyanins from your diet alone? So unfortunately, many of us aren't. And there are reviews out and published literature showing that the average intake of people and their anthocyanins every day throughout the world is around 25 milligrams. And as you can see, this isn't just the United States, this is in Europe and China and Australia. And what we've shown in our clinical studies and third-party literature is that you need 200 milligrams or more of these anthocyanins to get these metabolic benefits. And so we've looked at third-party literature and looked at, well, what are some of these biological effects of anthocyanins? And what we have found is that they positively impact a lot of these biological pathways and indications in tissues like our fat tissue or our adipose, or in our muscle tissues, or in our pancreas, or in our liver, where it helps decrease fat accumulation, as you'll see in some of our studies, and decreasing oxidative stress. And all of these pathways in these different tissues and organs in our body help shift us towards a healthier metabolic state. And what this heat map is showing is this shift in these biochemical pathways and processes. And so what we've done is look at third-party literature and see, how does anthocyanins impact these pathways? And this is directional change, and just showing that it does impact these pathways of the liver, the fat tissue, the muscle, and the pancreas. And we actually compared it to a metabolically healthy choice, something like exercise or physical activity. And you can see that these pathways and mechanisms shift in the same directions with exercise that it would with anthocyanins, just showing that anthocyanins are a positive indicator and can help shift your body's biochemistry to a healthier mode. And so, of course, we would never say that anthocyanins can replace that healthy lifestyle. And actually, what studies have shown is that anthocyanins are complementary to that healthy lifestyle. And anthocyanins have actually been shown to have complementary benefits to exercise. And so, one study looked at, of course, exercise positively impacts metabolic health and increases fat oxidation during exercise. But if somebody was exercising and consuming the anthocyanins, they saw a further increase in this fat oxidation or fat burn during exercise. So here at Nu Skin, we have had a number of studies that led to the breakthrough of this anthocyanin blend. And the first one was really finding the right type of anthocyanins. The second was we found that these anthocyanins protect that gastrointestinal or that GI tract. We then found that these anthocyanins actually modulate inflammation and metabolic signals. And we've shown these benefits in both a longer term clinical study, but also an immediate or an acute clinical study. We showed benefits. And so now we'll go into a little further detail of each of these. So initially we were screening and testing to get the right anthocyanin. So there's a lot of different types of anthocyanins. We talked about how there's different anthocyanins that give foods the different colors. And so initially we were screening over 10 different anthocyanin extracts. And what we found in our screening is that the ones that had the highest amount of these specific subclasses of anthocyanins, like cyanidin and delphinidin, they had the best response for metabolic health. And we then created a blend rich in anthocyanins from blackcurrant, bilberry, and black rice. And how we initially found that these subclasses of cyanidin and delphinidin were so important was actually in a cell culture model of intestinal cells, specifically CACO2 cells. And in this cell culture model, we add a stressor to the system, which in this case, it's an inflammatory compound, TNF alpha. And so when you add TNF alpha to these intestinal cells, it basically causes increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut. So basically allowing things to get through and be absorbed that you typically don't want to be absorbed. And so what we found is that when we added the stressor along with these anthocyanins, specifically the cyanidin and delphinidin, that it had that protective effect on these intestinal cells, and it strengthened that intestinal permeability to keep those things out that we do not want absorbed in the body. So based on this, we then created a blend that we tested in a preclinical model. And so in this study, we did feed the animals for 14 weeks. And what these graphs are showing is the C stands for control diet. This is just a normal diet that animals are fed. The next bar, the CA, is the control diet with anthocyanins. The black bar is actually high fat diet, which is kind of that Western diet, that unhealthy diet and modern lifestyle. And then you have the HFA, which stands for that high fat diet along with anthocyanins. So what the first graph is showing is basically intestinal permeability. And so if you consume a high fat diet, that increases your intestinal permeability. But if these animals were fed the high fat diet along with the anthocyanins that you can see in the purple bar, that had a protective effect and it maintained that intestinal integrity. The next graph, which shows endotoxin, and endotoxin is this important component that's actually absorbed from your intestine, but unfortunately, when it's absorbed, it serves as this inflammatory signal in the body and disrupts metabolic health. And what we found is that in this preclinical model, when fed that high fat diet, they had a significant increase in that endotoxin, that inflammatory signal. But when they consumed that high fat diet with anthocyanins, there was that protective effect. And then we also looked at some GI indications of microbiome and found that the high fat diet disrupted a healthy microbiome, and the high fat diet along with anthocyanins had a positive effect. And then we actually looked at those tight junction proteins. So those proteins that maintain the intestinal permeability. And again, we found that the high fat diet decreased those proteins, but if the high fat diet along with anthocyanins, that had that protective effect. So the next study was actually looking at metabolic health. And we found that high fat diet, it disrupted glucose tolerance and insulin sensitivity in these animals. But if it was fed the high fat diet along with the anthocyanins, again, there's that protective effect with glucose metabolism and insulin sensitivity, having that metabolic benefit. And these bottom pictures, I think, are really cool because what you see, this is basically a picture of the liver health histology. And what you can see with the control diet, it's a healthy liver. There's not a lot of fat or white droplets in the cells. But if you look at the high fat diet, all those white particles, that's fat in those liver cells. That's not what you want. You do not want a fatty liver. But if the animals were fed that high fat diet along with anthocyanins, it protected against having the fatty liver. And you can see that it's very similar to that control diet. So the first clinical study we did was in healthy obese individuals, and they took this anthocyanin and prebiotic supplement for 8 weeks. And basically we looked at changes in bacteria, intestinal health, and we looked at some blood glucose regulation as well. And what we found, if we compared their baseline microbiota and the end of study microbiota, so those bacteria in the GI system, we found there was a significant reduction in firmicutes and a significant increase in Bacteroides. And this is seen as a positive change in microbiota and something you see more similar in like a healthy, leaner individual. And in this same study, we looked at a number of indications of metabolic health. And one that really stood out was hemoglobin A1C. So hemoglobin A1C is a marker of blood glucose, not just a snapshot in time, but really over the course of a few months of what your blood sugar levels have been. And we showed that compared to baseline to the end of study of 8 weeks, that there was a significant reduction in hemoglobin A1C, so a healthier glucose response in these individuals. We then completed a second clinical study, and this is what we would call an acute study or looking at immediate benefits. Because in this unique design, we actually had healthy subjects. They were 19 to 35 years of age, these individuals that should have, healthy metabolic health. And they came into the lab 2 different times. So the first time they came in, they would take, let's say, the placebo and consume this high fat, high carbohydrate meal that you see in the picture. I don't know if that looks very appetizing to you or not, but it was 1,000 calories. And so that's one time they'd come in. And then the next time they would consume the same meal along with the anthocyanins. And we would collect blood and look at metabolic blood parameters over the course of 5 hours. And so what we found is that plasma endotoxins were positively impacted. And again, these endotoxins are one of those indications of inflammatory signal in the body. And we do not want those to be absorbed from our intestine into our systemic circulation. So the anthocyanins, when consumed with this high fat, high carbohydrate meal, it decreased the plasma endotoxins. We also saw a significant reduction in TNF alpha, an inflammatory cytokine. And we also saw that glucose and triglyceride area under the curve for that entire 5-hour period of time after consuming that meal was significantly reduced. So again, this study is really emphasizing that you're getting immediate benefits with just even 1 dose of this anthocyanin blend. And so just to summarize some of the research that we've talked about on the previous slides is that we were able to identify the right subclasses of anthocyanins and dose of anthocyanins to use in the blend. We were able to show that you can bolster metabolic health through anthocyanins, and the mechanism of action can be through healthy microbiota or the antioxidant system or inflammatory balance. And that these anthocyanins can support both immediate but also longer-term metabolic health. And so one of the mechanisms that we know is impacting our metabolic health on a daily basis is that modern lifestyle, it impacts our microbiota, It's causing that leaky gut, causing that increase in intestinal permeability by altering those tight junctions. And unfortunately, when this happens, it leads to something called endotoxemia. When we have too many of those endotoxins in circulation, this causes inflammation, it causes metabolic dysfunction. And what we've been able to show in our research is that anthocyanins really do help support that GI barrier function. It helps promote that healthy microbiome, and it helps promote those tight junctions in the GI tract. And you saw some of that research today. And what that does is it really does help support that healthy inflammatory balance in our entire body and help support metabolic health. And so this blend of anthocyanins and anthocyanins in general, it's been shown to work through a number of mechanisms that we've talked about. Inflammatory balance, it works through the GI or the gut health. It's increasing the antioxidant and your ability to combat oxidative stress. And the result is a healthier immune system, healthier response to inflammation. It supports vital organs such as your liver and your heart. And it also impacts a number of those key indicators that we've talked about with improved metabolism, like your blood glucose and your blood triglycerides or cholesterol. So anthocyanins is one really great ingredient for the gut microbiota. And as we've talked about today, the key indication that it's impacting is your metabolic health, which is so important for overall health. But gut health is so diverse and complex. And so there are other ingredients that can provide additional benefits for GI health concerns. And so one of these is probiotics. So probiotics are these live organisms that can actually help the gut microbiome with specialized benefits. And one of these would be like immunity. Another ingredient set is ginger and artichoke, which has really been shown clinically to help relieve digestive discomfort. And then there's ingredients like prebiotics that are basically those foods that help those healthy gut bacteria, and postbiotics, some of those substances that are actually produced by those beneficial bacteria that have targeted benefits in the body. So there's a lot of different ingredients that can impact gut health. So thank you so much. It's been so fun to talk to you today about anthocyanins and metabolic health.